Hey everyone, let me pitch something to those among you who are just like me for real. Does this describe you at all? You like video games a lot, yet your work life and other responsibilities leave you so exhausted that you often just find yourself too tired for most of the candidates you have in your library for a little gaming session. You do still get in the right mood and headspace to appreciate some hard-ass challenging games every now and then, but you found yourself gravitating towards more relaxing titles to unwind with ever since your life became so stressful. It's made you not usually want the same kind of friction in a hobby you're trying to enjoy, because let's be honest, raging and cursing at your 25th attempt at beating a large bug boy on your screen while that high school friend of yours that you're still following on social media is posting his wedding pictures kind of makes you go, what the fuck am I doing with my life, doesn't it? At the very least, it kind of makes you want to drop the game and maybe play something similar but more chill instead, because that will at least not have you throwing tantrums in your room like an overgrown baby. But the problem is, some genres barely have anything like that to choose from. I mean, this goes without saying for Souls-likes for instance, but I also kind of feel this when it comes to Metroidvanias. I did not really talk about this in the Grime video too much, but that game surely took some effort to beat for me. Blasphemous is basically 2D Dark Souls, so I don't really need to elaborate much on that, and I start sweating every time I look at Silksong still so menacingly sitting in my library. You know, I've been waiting on that one for so long just like everyone else, but I've heard and seen such things that I just can't get myself to touch it. I'm genuinely so fucking scared. I can't deal with that kind of game made by freaks for freaks right now, you know? It also doesn't help that most of these titles take like 20 hours minimum as well. 1 or 2 stressful sessions to experience something short but great is one thing, but when a game does like Grime and immediately marks the very end goal of the journey on the world map right away, I'll just zoom out and scroll left and right and up and down to get a feel for how large the map is going to be, and I just go, oh boy, here we fucking go. All that to say, if you're also like this, then boy have I got the game for you today. I mean, this title screen already speaks for itself. It's a nice, relaxing and colorful lo-fi break from the usual ominous dark void we find ourselves in usually, isn't it? Already it was no surprise to me that regardless of the author's overall enjoyment of the game as a whole, most reviews I've seen on 9 Years of Shadows before picking it up agreed that the presentation was easily the strongest aspect of this game. And after finishing it for myself, I definitely agree with this sentiment. I have to admit that at first I was suspicious of that strength only being a result of copying someone else's homework so closely. The few screenshots I saw on the store page and the very lukewarm 75% mostly positive rating made me guess that this was just a Blasphemous clone trying to follow that game's formula 1-to-1 to capitalize on its success with no soul of its own. I am so glad that I still gave the game a chance to prove me wrong, because it absolutely has. If this video is on your first monitor by any chance and you paid attention to the footage I've shown so far, you might have also noticed this slick gradient UI that is not something you would expect from something like Castlevania or Blasphemous at all. In fact, the first game it ever reminded me of was Sayonara Wild Hearts, believe it or not. And combining that style with this sort of pixel art does not seem like a good idea at first glance to be sure, but the game is so much more vibrant than its dark and grimy colleagues using the same kind of visual style that it actually ends up feeling so right. In fact, I skipped over this before deliberately, but you immediately get a feel for how absolutely committed this game is to its girly side before you even hit the title screen, since the opening cutscene that plays right before that depicts our protagonist Europa donning her armor in a magical girl transformation sequence. Absolute cinema. I could keep going on and on about the stellar presentation of this game for many more minutes, touching on the brilliant sprite work being the third cornerstone of the game's visuals next to that slick menu UI and the vibrant pixel art I just gushed over, the gorgeous game banner and the logo, and the life bar being in the shape of a weapon and its handle, which so unfairly caters to me and my personal biases specifically. And as if that wasn't enough by itself, it's also a halberd, the utmost superior melee weapon of all. Fight me. But unfortunately I have to eventually get to the reason why that positive rating is only at 75% rather than 95%, so let's do it now and get it out of the way. One of the most common criticisms you will ever hear about this game is being style over substance, and even though I am a firm believer that style in fact is substance, performance, I cannot lie that you might end up disappointed if you see this game's visuals and expect the same level of quality in its writing or gameplay. I wouldn't call either of those aspects straight up bad by any means, but they are also nothing to write home about. The narrative is just serviceable. It's pretty standard and filled with common tropes. There aren't really any lines to cringe or roll your eyes at, but also nothing to punch you in the gut or bury you into deep thoughts. Still, the sincerity with which it is told is to be commended, as well as the few characters that do have quirks being as entertaining as they are. The orchestra members are especially a highlight with how diverse they are both in looks and personalities. They do really feel like an unlikely odd band of misfits. The protagonist was also able to grow on me in time, so I guess even if the story is nothing special overall, it was still engaging enough to keep me following without skipping dialogue. I cannot say confidently that it would be the same for you though. At the end of the day, it doesn't seem like an afterthought necessarily, but clearly not the utmost priority either. It's kinda just there so that there is a reasonable in-universe motivation for exploring and fighting through the map. Speaking of those things, the gameplay is also very simple and bare bones, if not downright lackluster. If you're the type of person that usually looks for complex and varied mechanics, builds, movement tech, combo strings or such and such in your games, and those are the things that make or break an experience for you above anything, all the other shit I praised and will praise is not likely going to be able to save this game for you. Sorry to disappoint. First off, you have light and heavy attacks, but the most optimal way to use them together is always the same. There are two reasons for this. The first is that a heavy attack takes a while to charge when in the same window of time. You can use up to 3 light attacks, which means better DPS overall. The second reason is that your heavy attacks only deal the kind of real heavy damage to be worth that wind up time if they are used right after a 2 or 3 hit light attack combo, dealing 2 to 3 times their normal damage. Combine this with the fact that most enemies and bosses have clearly telegraphed vulnerability windows in between their attacks or when they are staggered for you to deal your big damage, and that means what you have to do in almost every fight is use the 3 light attacks into heavy attack combo whenever the window is large enough, and use the 2 light attacks into heavy attack combo whenever it is smaller. To be fair, there are a couple of other moves you can do as well, such as charging up a light attack to make it one big AoE attack, but this did not ever feel good to use or worth it to me. You also can't combo while hitting low or hitting up, and while you do have this little air kick, it's more for pogoing off enemies and objects in the environment for platforming rather than a combat tool. The only defensive option you have besides, just jumping or moving out of the way is a backwards dash. You get no parries, forward dash, air dash, launcher, helm splitter, ground slam, finishers, throwables or consumables. Though you do get a projectile, to be fair, that also later gets upgraded and uses your health or light as a resource in order to keep you from just spamming projectiles, which is good design. I guess that also makes for a good segue into what light and vitality are. I'd say these are probably the most unique and well-crafted parts of the game's mechanics. The way it works is that you only have a single resource you have to keep track of, which is this bar right here, your light. It gets depleted whenever you take damage like a regular health bar of course, but it is also what you have to spend in order to launch your projectiles, which are necessary to break through certain obstacles and enemy armor. Once it is depleted, your vitality points will instead start taking damage, going down by 1 point each time regardless of the severity of the taken damage. This makes the whole thing sound very forgiving with how you cannot ever get one-tapped by anything thanks to the way it's designed, and how the projectiles are also only necessary sometimes despite using up your light. However, the twist is that every light-based action is actually mapped to the same button, and what it does is entirely context-based. If your light bar is not fully depleted yet, pressing the button will send out a projectile, which means you cannot replenish your light without fully depleting it first. Once it is depleted, a little pendulum thingy will appear above your head briefly, and pressing the button in this state will stop it. If you are able to stop it within this green window, you get some of your light back immediately. If you miss it, you either have to kill an enemy to get a little amount or enter this long animation where you charge up to replenish a great amount. This means of course that you are often punished for missing the pendulum window in a tight spot, making it important to get good at its timing. What it also means though is that you always have the choice to ignore the pendulum completely and take the risk to vulnerably wait for a larger window to heal for a greater amount. Not only that, but the pendulum window gets smaller and smaller each subsequent time while also healing less and less, so that you can't just keep immediately healing up to 50% each time. The returns are diminishing and eventually you have to reset them by healing the long way. Sometimes Sometimes you may even get such a lucky break when your light bar isn't fully depleted yet that you may decide to spam a couple projectiles to deplete it yourself and heal right away, if you are willing to take that risk. I just adore everything about this health management system. It keeps things so simple by making it all tied to one resource and one button, while also allowing for so much player expression, introducing all these various risk-reward scenarios for you to decide between. The armor switching system, on the other hand, is kind of the exact opposite of this, introducing way too many tools without making it meaningful to actually choose between them. Basically, you get 4 different sets of armor corresponding to 4 different elements, those being fire, water, earth and lightning. You're able to switch among them on the fly, but they are all functionally the same in combat. The only significant difference between them are the traversal abilities linked to each one, but even then, these abilities can only be used in specific environments, such as the water armor's mermaid ability only being available underwater and the fire armor's hover ability only being available in hot areas. This would still be fine if you had to switch the armor at the correct time during the platforming sections where you have to string these abilities together, but the game does that for you automatically. Like when I get launched into a waterfall out of a tunnel, it's not me switching to the water armor and turning on the mermaid form at the right time. It's all automatic. Then can I ask, what even is the point of having the ability to switch between them manually besides activating these different colored switches, which are just a lame justification for it? These could have all just been regular traversal abilities you get throughout the game without making it this pseudo style switching thing. The lightning element doesn't even get its own traversal ability despite being the first one that's introduced. It's only the yellow switches that it's necessary for. And if you think this all sounds bad already, let me tell you about the combat side of it all. When it comes to combat, none of the elements have its own unique moveset. The animations and visual effects are slightly different, but they're all functionally the same besides the AoE effects of the upgraded charged light attacks. That is the only difference. They do not even inflict different status effects like shock or burn, which would have been the bare minimum. Instead, all we get is an endless onslaught of color-coded enemies for the entire length of the game. And what's even funnier is that you don't even really need to use the elements that they are weak to for the most part if you have upgraded even one of your armor sets. You can just simply use that for most enemies regardless of their color. It will take a few more attacks at most, which only means spending an extra few seconds on them. Even with these shielded knights that straight up resist any element but the right one, it's enough to simply attack their unguarded feet a couple of times. The only significant difference these element weaknesses make is during certain boss fights where the health pool of the enemy is actually big enough to make you feel the difference in how quickly you are melting it down, but even these bosses come with their own problems. They either end up being too easy because of it, or end up being Frenice, who is weak to water but does not have the corresponding outline around her unlike every other enemy for some reason, or any clue in her dialogue that she has a weakness to it. I guess you are supposed to guess that she is weak to water because she has a sword made of fire and she throws out fire lasers, but why would I assume that her body would be weak to water just because of that? That would be like if fire trucks were made to be especially weak to fire. Kind of defeats the whole purpose, doesn't it? I only found out that she's weak to water because the fight was taking so long otherwise that I figured I had to be doing something wrong and asked the internet. I also tried attacking every single boss after her with every single element just in case to make sure I did not experience something like this again, and it really was just her. No other enemy in the game without a clear colored outline was weak to any specific element besides the super fifth element you get at the end of the game, which everyone is weak to. Major spoiler warning for this section as I'm about to talk about that element and the end of the game. Skip here if you wish to avoid it. As always, I'm going to give you a 3-second countdown to do so. Here it goes. I both love and hate the inclusion of the final element of light. On one hand, its ability to glide through the area so fast while crushing every weak enemy you come across just by touching them, combined with every enemy now being weak to your attacks and your projectile being replaced with this giant room clearing explosion, ends up making this a pretty effective player empowerment / power fantasy / god mode section, or whatever the fucking correct term is. I'm talking about the Ashtray Maze and Half-Life 2 Super Gravity Gun sections again, again, you know what I'm referring to. The overall look and sheer glow of the armor is also a sight to behold, as well as the change in Europa's sprites that literally feels like she's finally turned from this strong yet doubtful and clueless girl to an unshakable confident woman. I think the determined smile she wears from this point on does a lot for this. And the best part is that this isn't even her final form's final form. You can actually upgrade this armor set as well, like all the others, and only after completing every single side quest given to you by the orchestra members. Needless to say, it feels really satisfying to finally achieve this upgrade and reach your absolute maximum strength. As if Europa didn't already look baller as fuck wearing this, she now starts to glow even brighter and more colorful, leaving after images behind her as she glides like she's about to open a light fountain and we're gonna start playing Rune Delta. It feels like she could break out of the screen and grab me in real life at this point if she wanted to. That all being said though, it's now time to go over my gripes with this armor. First of all, instead of actually being added as a 5th armor set to your arsenal, it replaces the lightning set, which kind of feels like a wasted opportunity when also combined with the fact that lightning has already been so useless. I would have preferred it much more if that element was also given the same treatment as the others and got its own abilities, while the light armor became your 5th set instead of replacing it. My other gripe is that getting the super powered up final form for yourself means that you have beaten every single boss in the game besides the last one, which kind of sucks because it means that you'll only get to use it in one last encounter. In theory, it shouldn't be a problem as long as you still get to feel empowered in that one, but the final boss is so ridiculously beefy compared to everything else in the game that you barely feel the difference outside of the damage numbers popping up. But hey, look, I'm not going to complain about a final boss feeling so above everything we had fought until now. It's still fitting. The whole fight feels so climactic and desperate and final with 3 long phases you have to give your all to survive. It's genuinely great from a gameplay perspective. The real issue I have is with how it ends. See, this is actually a rematch against the same boss that kicks our ass at the beginning of the game with no sweat at all in a very short encounter that ends with a scripted loss. Now, I'm not saying that we have to definitely win the second encounter just because of that for it to be a satisfying finale. There are plenty of ways to still make this encounter work without betraying the idea that this guy is nigh invincible, no matter how strong Europa also is. You could, for instance, end it in a stalemate with neither side willing to back down no matter how much they endure. Or you could make it like the end of Hellblade, for instance, where after reaching a certain point, you can hold out as much as you humanly can, but there's no winning condition because your opponent just won't fall no matter what you do. So you eventually have to give up and accept that you can't fight anymore. Either way would most definitely work better than just having us die to the exact same attack as the one in the beginning. I mean, why did we even go through everything until now if it was just going to be the same fuck you laser again? Not only does it make the final encounter itself feel totally pointless because this isn't even some desperate last resort attack of the boss but something he could have used at any time he wanted, but the entire journey here as well. Like, yeah, I get it, we were never going to defeat him by force, and even if we did, it was still going to result in having to talk no jutsu our way out at the end because this story reveals that this is actually just a really upset kid affected by a curse, and Europa promises to find another way than slaying him because she's grown as a person and stuff. But like, did we have to ignore how much she's also grown in power to do this? Again, she could have just made him submit without resorting to killing, drawn him to a stalemate, or simply just tanked or dodged this dumb fucking laser so that we could at least see that it would take more to defeat her now, right? Look man, all I'm saying is next time you put a red-haired polearm using heroine with an eye patch and magic armor in your game, make sure to also take notes from her genocide route fight. Alright, since I don't have a smooth segue into anything else set up at this point, let's just briefly talk about the music next, I guess. It's pretty good, just don't expect like a Toby Fox level soundtrack that will make you transcend reality listening to it. It very much complements the game well, but it's not really something that will stick with you for a long time after finishing it. The biggest standouts to me among the tracks were the main title and Blacksmith themes because of how chill they are, the first areas theme because of how well it gives off the feeling of excitement when embarking on a new adventure and discovering a new world, the Orphanage theme because of how funky it is, and the Capra Cauldrons theme because of how much it breaks the norm yet still feels just right. To explain what I mean by that, you know how volcanic or fiery areas like this in most games usually have these really intense or ominous background tracks to complement the sheer danger and hostility of the area, especially since they also usually tend to be at or at least near the end game? Well, this game's fiery biome is actually in the mid game and it has a very chill soundtrack which fits the vibe of the place. It's not meant to be like hell or anything, it's just where old blacksmiths used to cast things and stuff as far as I was able to understand. Very fitting and nice. Next, I wish to go over a few specific boss encounters that I found to be especially good or bad in detail. So this section is going to include minor spoilers. Skip to this point if you wish to avoid them. Here goes the 3-second countdown again. To me, it seems like the biggest effort to make up for the lackluster combat system was put into making the boss encounters as varied and interesting as possible. There are some genuine winners here, like this chess-themed boss where the attack patterns of the pieces correspond with their actual roles on a chessboard, and they also have different elemental weaknesses to add some spice to the fight as well. Unfortunately, that aspect suffers from the same thing that the basic enemies suffer from. That is, the pieces still being very easy to destroy with any element anyway. It's still a very cool encounter though. Some of the main bosses also make the traversal abilities of certain elements a part of the fight as well. Like this one where you have to keep yourself in mermaid form to be able to dodge the incoming attacks, and this one where you have to remain in your fire gliding mode and use this stream of small incoming meteors to keep yourself afloat and dodge the boss's projectiles. Any meteor you break also turns into a fire projectile to damage the boss until he becomes vulnerable to wail on him directly. Overall, there's a good bit of variety to these encounters and most of them are fun. There are still a couple of annoying losers though, and I especially have to touch on the two gang fights here. To me, what makes a gang fight fun is having to keep track of more than one threat at once, and those threats also having different characteristics so that there is a meaningful choice to make on which one you wish to focus on first depending on what kind of player you are. The perfect example is of course ONS from Dark Souls, but even many imperfect examples that employ just one of the characteristics is usually enough to make these battles fun for me. For instance, the enemies can be the exact same in characteristics, so it does not really matter which one you choose to focus on first, but the fact that you still have to keep track of all of them at once keeps the fight chaotic and fun nonetheless. These slime siblings, however, are the exact opposite in both aspects, leading to one of the most uninteresting and dull gang fights I have honestly ever seen. One of them is the attacker and the other is the healer, which can only heal the attacker and not themselves. Not only that, but the heal always puts the attacker back at maximum health, so you literally have no choice to make but to take down the healer first, and then the attacker doesn't even become enraged or anything, so the fight becomes even easier and less interesting. At least the healer also occasionally threw out a single projectile before to keep track of. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about this fight, it just kinda sucks. The other gang fight is relatively better because it's a surprise second phase after you successfully put down one of these snakes by itself, which also does works as a tutorial for the real meat of the encounter. Both snakes pose serious threat and one even becomes enraged and harder to avoid after you kill the other. The only questionable part is how when you stagger one of them to wail on it, the other just waits around without doing anything for no discernible reason. I get the point is to give you a breather from the onslaught and make the encounter go faster, but like, a gang fight is not a place for that. It's in fact the place to do the exact opposite of that. I think it could have worked better if the first phase was maybe a little shorter and the snakes in the second phase did not give you the same room to wail on them so easily. It would be more in the spirit of a good gang fight if one kept attacking even when the other is down on the ground, not too constantly so that you still get to deal some good damage to the downed one, but enough that you don't get to deal it for completely free. There is also a rival character here that falls completely flat for me. Implied history or no history between the rival characters can work when they are similar yet opposite in meaningful ways both in design and personality, but in this case it seems to me that the creators of the game only had a very surface level understanding, if not a complete misunderstanding of what makes a compelling rival character. Giving them a sword and silver hair and making them edgy does not automatically make them cool if those are not the clear result of conscious choices made based on the protagonist or whoever is the other half of the rivalry. If you ask me, a much more sarcastic and cocky rival here would have worked much better better to clash with Europa's constantly serious demeanor instead of just a slightly edgier version of her with silver hair. As it is, their dialogue just feels like over-dramatic word salad full of don't get in my ways and shit that is not too different from any other dynamic in the game instead of having its own unmatched energy. This greatly reduces the effect of what should normally be the most exciting build-up to a climactic fight, and the actual fight is unfortunately even worse. In my honest opinion, if there is one thing you should never do with a rival battle, it is taking away or adding to the rival's own pure agency and skill, even if it's only a little bit. If the rival is not fighting you with solely their own body, weapon and ideology, but because they are corrupted by something that makes them irrational and their weapon grows into this demonic version of itself with evil purple aura, that is not a rival fight. That is a disappointment and it completely misses the point. There is a reason why Tekken 8's second to last chapter is the one where Jin and Kazuya are fighting in their ultimate angel and demon forms in space, while the last chapter, the actual climax of the game, is the one where they've lost all their powers and keep fighting in human form in the buttfuck of nowhere. I'll let the gaming Brit speak for me.
And I thought, like, you know, when we were going into space and doing the whole, my powers is beyond your power stuff, I thought that was, like, pretty lame, because I don't even really, like, there's not much to go on. But then it was like, when they slam back into Earth without their powers, and then Kazuya's like, I agree. All that stuff we did in space, it was cringe. Now let's play some Tekken. And then the devil stuff, that's been part of Tekken since the beginning. It's just not as cool as, like, the human characters going overdrive. Kazuya psyching himself up, and with the lightning coming down in the background as it, like, syncing up is, like, way cooler than, like, him firing some big laser beam.
By the way, I am planning to make a whole dedicated video at some point in the future that goes deeper into this very topic in detail, going over everything that I think makes for good rivalries in games and my favorite examples, as well as what I think does not work at all and a few examples to those as well. If you would be interested in seeing that someday, be sure to keep supporting the channel. Back to 9 Years of Shadows, I have to unfortunately warn you that this game is also a little bit of a buggy mess. There were several times when the audio glitched for me, repeatedly playing a sound effect from the last boss I defeated over and over in the background until I closed and opened the game again. There were also many cases of button prompts not working, so I walked away and back to make them disappear and reappear again, and only then did they work properly. I know how much of a super minor thing this sounds like, but it happened often enough to become very irritating in time. There's also a moment where the color disappears from the map because of story reasons and is then supposed to come back, but it didn't for me until, you guessed it, I closed and opened the game again. I also died to poison once, even though I had the earth armor on that makes you immune to it. Thankfully the game is generous with checkpoints, so I did not lose too much progress. There were also many occasions where the enemies did not react to me and just stood there or ignored me until I killed them. Fortunately this never happened with bosses and only with basic enemies, which are just a joke for the most part anyway. And lastly, I think there was supposed to be a music track played by the orchestra after you finish all their quests and they perform for you in this cutscene, but I instead just kept hearing the usual theme of the biome we were in instead. I assume this is an audio glitch, but if it was intentional, then just why? Why not have them actually play something here to go with the cutscene and as a reward for completing all the side quests? Again, if this was not a glitch but an actual conscious decision, it might genuinely be one of the worst in this game. So after all that, you might now be saying something like, wow Sarp, this game sounds like such a mixed bag. I thought you were going to list more positives and less negatives overall due to how excited you sounded at the beginning about recommending this. Good point. Let's go back to that beginning, shall we? You remember how I described most games in this genre as a bit too long and hard for the average overworked, overstressed adult? Well, you know what else is also long and hard besides the obvious? Not this game. I finished the whole thing while going almost full completionist in about 11.5 hours, and easily an hour of that was me being lost and clueless as to where to go solely because of my own stupidity. I got stuck at one point running around the whole map trying to figure out where to go, and when I finally gave up and looked it up online, I was like, oh my god, I am so goddamn blind and stupid. Which means that you can fully 100% this game in just about 10 hours if you're less stupid and more skilled than me. Perhaps even 9. Hell, if you're just rushing the main objectives, you can probably be done done in less than 8 hours. I cannot emphasize enough how much shorter that is than any Metroidvania I've ever played. Borderline bite-sized, and yet it still feels like a proper Metroidvania nonetheless, because it is designed like one true and true, just more tightly knit. The rooms are small and the enemies are easy to take care of, letting you just cruise through the map at lightning speed even when it's your first time discovering a new area. The save points are scattered around generously for the most part, and the fast travel points as well. This also leads to an extremely well-paced experience where, although your combat and movement capabilities are so limited even at their most expanded, you acquire those expansions so rapidly that you never find yourself bored and wishing you could find the next upgrade already and explore more freely. Because each time you get one of the new armor sets and new areas open up for exploration, next thing you know, you also find a new traversal ability just 10 minutes later, and another 10 minutes later you're at the next main boss. Another 10 minutes after defeating them, you get to upgrade the new armor set for bigger damage. Then you find a new orchestra member in another 10 minutes and get to go kill a bunch of optional bosses for them before the end of that hour of gameplay. Some of them as fun and unique as that chess boss I mentioned before. The game just keeps going at this lightning fast pace, which remedies so much of its shortcomings. I played it in many small 1 to 1.5 hour sessions, and each of them were so packed. I think I always fought at least 2 bosses, found at least 2 new abilities, explored like 2 whole biomes in and out, and upgraded at least something, whether that was my light, vitality or armor. 5 hours into this game, I felt like I did just as much as I would do in 15 for most other games. At just about a little over that halfway point, I had all 4 basic armor sets and their associated abilities. That might make you think that the latter half would be slower paced, because what else would remain to even give the player? And the answer is the whole rest of the goddamn map. This is when the exploration really becomes fun in this game. It's not only when the main objective path branches out and becomes much less linear, but also when you finally get everything you need to revisit all those areas you couldn't get to before and find all the upgrade materials and optional bosses you missed. It all flows just as fast and fun as the first half because of that tightly knit nature of the map I mentioned before. And this is the very reason I still recommend this game. A pace as excellent as this can really elevate something from mediocre to great for me. It does not sound too complicated to achieve, but believe me that it very much is, and so many experienced developers still get it wrong. Above all, it requires a great deal of self-awareness and honesty with yourself. In my latest backlog bonfire, I began with this game called Immortal Redneck and praised it for this very quality. To briefly summarize, it is a very simple FPS roguelike that is fun to play for a while, but it's not something you would ever want to dedicate hundreds of hours of your life to, like say The Binding of Isaac or Risk of Rain 2. And it so clearly knows this because it lets you see almost everything in the game in just about 20 hours total. It knows that it is not the next Hades or Isaac, so it does not expect you to sink the same amount of time into it where most other B-tier roguelikes still do. And I just respect that so much. I know this may sound like a backhanded compliment, but I'm really not saying all this because I look down on these games. Everyone likes a Michelin star gourmet meal, but sometimes it is cheap fast food that you crave. They're both good for the soul, but no one wants to spend their entire evening at a fancy dinner table savoring a McChicken. What I'm getting at with all of this is that I kind of look at 9 Years of Shadows the same way I look at Immortal Redneck. If this map was larger or took longer to traverse with this little going on, if there was a bigger downtime between every boss or upgrade, or if the bosses were harder to defeat with both their movesets and your moveset being so limited, this game wouldn't have worked as well as it does. It could have been a frustrating slog whose lack of narrative and mechanical depth did not justify its runtime at all. It fortunately avoids that pitfall because it knows it's not the next Hollow Knight, hell, not even the next Grime, but it's still what some of us need sometimes, and I'm so glad for it being what it is due to that reason. With all that being said, as always, take care of yourselves and thank you for watching.